I'm Ernst Zundel with another Voice of Freedom program coming to you from Toronto, Ontario, Canada. We are still going on with our in-depth series called The Holocaust of the Germans. Well, as a German person, I take offense at that. I'm sick and tired of having the German heritage besmirched. My father's generation, most of whom have now gone on and have died, we the sons of those who fought to Stalingrad, have every right to defend our parents' generation. And that's what I'm doing. I'm doing it with an American book called Gruesome Harvest, the costly attempt to exterminate the people of Germany. We are nearing the end of this long series, which I think just had to be done, because the German viewpoint must be heard, and it's long overdue. And so we return to Gruesome Harvest, this American book, only 135 pages, plus all the many, many footnotes. A treasure, a treasure. If you want to bring order to your troubled mind, what happened during the war and to the aftermath, let me tell you, this book has it. And I return just briefly to a quote in which, on page 125, the famous American writer Carl von Wiegand, on April the 23rd, 1944, writes that he was summoned to Ambassador William C. Bullitt's embassy, the American embassy in France, on April 1939, and he was said, war had been decided upon. The ambassador said, war had been decided upon. Remember, that was 4 months before a shot was fired in Europe. And when the writer protested that this would drive the Germans into the arms of Soviet Russia, the American ambassador, 4 months before the war broke out, said, what of it? There will not be enough Germans left when the war is over to be worth Bolshevizing. And so we return to page 127, which talks about Allied policies and how Winston Churchill says that he cannot believe that now that the United States is in the war, he said, I cannot believe that there is any other fact in the whole world which can compare with that. That is what I dreamt of, aimed at, and worked for, and now it has come to pass, meaning the war between America, England, and the Western Allies, Germany, and the Soviet Union. Our Lend-Lease program had been squeezed through Congress by the narrowest of margins. As a peace measure, Senator Glass had given away its real purpose, however, when he said he favored loaning Great Britain all the war equipment we could spare to wipe Germany off the face of the map. Senator Glass, remember, had given away his real purpose when he said he favored loaning Great Britain all the war equipment we could spare to wipe Germany off the face of the map. Just happens to be that Senator Glass is another one of the brethren of Nathan Theodore Kaufman and Henry Morgenthau. It is always that kind of thinking. At least Glass had the courage to say what was on his mind and on the mind of many, a figure in Washington and elsewhere. Hitler has been condemned as a violator of international pacts and agreements. Yet when we sent destroyers to Britain long before Pearl Harbor and later on permitted many of our vessels to be commandeered by British officers, we violated Section 3 of Article 5 of the Act of June 15, 1917, which provides that during a war in which the United States is a neutral nation, it shall be unlawful to send out of the jurisdiction of the United States any vessel built, armed, or equipped as a vessel of war, with any intent or with reasonable cause to believe that it shall be used by any belligerent nation. We also violated the Hague Convention, which forbids a neutral nation to supply any war material whatever to any belligerent country. There is no need to pursue the argument further. We have shown that good grounds exist for doubting, in some degree at least, the charge that the German people, because of their perverse natures in their will and lust for war, were the sole culprits in the late conflict. There is equal room, therefore, for doubting the justice of the Potsdam program to cripple the Germany and condemn its people to perpetual poverty, and equally sound moral grounds for the repudiation of that program in Potsdam. Now let's turn to collective guilt and war propaganda. The victors in every war think they are right and the defeated wrong. The late war has offered no exception. By continuing to condemn the defeated in this war as a race of criminals and punishing them accordingly, as we at first set out to do, we would be setting a most dangerous precedent, one which our children might have good reason to regret. For if we should ever lose a war, we could only expect similar treatment. Remember what I've said in previous programs. We Germans will remember. It's not a threat. It's a statement that comes from the bottom of the heart of every German. The indignities that you have allowed the conquerors of Germany, the real conquerors of Germany, not your GIs, the real conquerors of Germany, to heap upon the German nation for the last 50 years is so utterly disgusting that I do not want you to think that you can inflict that kind of psychic trauma and damage on the reputation of an entire nation, that one day it will not come back to you and you will rue the day, believe me, when karma will be done. It is manifestly unjust to blame and punish the people of any country for the acts of their leaders, especially whether people have been brought under the heel of a dictatorship, which under heavy penalty compels conformity to the leaders, edicts and orders. The truth is that the people of no nation in modern history, including ourselves, have ever enjoyed an important voice in the making of the great decisions, either of going to war or of framing the peace agreements. This is one of the greatest facts we must face. America cannot possibly add amelioration to the sordid game of power politics which has plunged the nations of the world into one terrible war after another, until the people do assert themselves and insist upon the injection of justice into the peace arrangements. But before this can be accomplished, they must break the bonds of false propaganda. This propaganda flows from two major levels, a higher and a lower. Britain's pose as upholder of righteousness, while actually engaged in manipulating the balance of power system, exemplifies the upper level. This type of propaganda is poignantly described by the late John Maynard Keynes in The Economic Consequences of the Peace, in which he says the following: "The politics of power are inevitable, and there is nothing very new to learn about this war or the end of it. What was fought for? England had destroyed, as in each preceding century, a trade rival. A mighty chapter had been closed in the secular struggle between the glories of Germany and France. Prudence required some measure of lip service to the ideals of foolish Americans and hypocritical Englishmen, but it would be stupid to believe that there is much room in the world, as it really is, for such affairs as the League of Nations or any sense in the principle of self-determination, except as an ingenious formula for rearranging balance of power in one's own interest." I like this line. Prudence required some measure of lip service to the ideals of foolish Americans and hypocritical Englishmen. That's John Maynard Keynes in The Economic Consequences of the Peace. Yeah, prudence required some measure of lip service to the ideals of foolish Americans and hypocritical Englishmen. This was written about World War I, but it applies as well to the Second. Another Englishman, the great Disraeli, Jewish background, said, "All great events have been distorted. Most of the important causes concealed. Some of the principal characters never appear. And all who figure are so misunderstood and misrepresented that the result is a complete mystification. If the history of England is ever written by one who has the knowledge and the courage, the world would be astonished." Only a Jew like Disraeli could say it, because obviously he knew a great deal about it. Let me read it to you again and then apply it to the Holocaust, or to Adolf Hitler, or to National Socialist Germany. Disraeli: "All great events have been distorted, most of the important causes concealed. Some of the principal characters never appear, and all who figure are so misunderstood and misrepresented that the result is complete mystification. If the history of England is ever written by one who has the knowledge and the courage, the world would be astonished." Do you understand how important it is to revise history, to keep digging, scratching, searching libraries, documents, first-hand accounts of survivors, diaries, and so on, and not to allow the mouthpieces, the propagandists of the powerful, to tell only their version, because, as Disraeli said, that it would leave nothing but to complete mystification. British Foreign Minister Ernest Bevin told the truth about the propaganda of the lower level when he said at the London Conference of Foreign Ministers, February 10, 1946, "A newspaper has three things to do. One is to amuse, another is to entertain, and the rest is to mislead." Now, let me tell you, look at every single newspaper that you see today, what is referred to in England as the bum and titty press. And what you have is, a newspaper has three things to do. One is to amuse, that's why you get all these weird stories, and you get the center spread of the near-naked girls. One other one is to entertain, and the rest is to mislead. There you go. That such propaganda has played an enormous part in the fomenting most wars cannot be doubted. It deceives and bewilders the public, inflaming it and strengthening its innate prejudices, which civilizing processes ordinarily hold to tolerable proportions. People can accurately judge only those things which come within the purview of their direct experience, or which they are allowed to view from all angles by educational processes. When the medium upon which the people rely to bring them their foreign news color and emasculate the facts, or even manufacture them out of whole cloth, as they sometimes do, there is no possibility for the public to get the truth. Its collective judgment, the accuracy of which is the base upon which the democratic processes rest, cannot in consequence be reliable. On the contrary, if its judgment is misled and its passion inflamed properly for the purpose, it will inevitably support mad adventures, unjust interventions, and other tragic missteps in international affairs. Remember the hullabaloo, how Desert Storm was created out of nothing? Remember the Gulf of Tonkin resolution? Remember this Pearl Harbor attack, which the British clearly knew the Americans were manipulating the Japanese into attacking? And Bullitt already knew 4 months before the war that war had been decided upon by the powers that had the means to do it. Not little people, not the British Tommy, the German Lancer, or the French Poilu. They just did the dying, the suffering, the fighting. They gave their eyes, their limbs, their legs, their arms, their health, their lives. Thus Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, a month before war broke out, sadly observed, Unhappily, bad feeling between nations is fomented daily by poisonous propaganda in the press and by other means. I cannot help feeling that if only we halt this war of words and some action is taken which would tend to restore confidence of the people in the peaceful institutions and intentions of all the statesmen of Europe, if only that could be done, then I still feel that I know of no question that could not and should not be solved by peaceful discussions. The gain would be enormous. On the other hand, if war should come, whichever side may claim ultimate victory, nothing is more certain than that the victor and vanquished alike would glean a gruesome harvest of human misery and suffering. This is why this book is called Gruesome Harvest, from which I am quoting you. What an eloquent statement by Neville Chamberlain, much reviled, much reviled. He so hoped to bring peace in our time. And obviously, he knew that there were these forces whipping up the public. How this man must have gone to his grave. Americans as well as the British were flooded with misleading, inflammatory propaganda on the eve of the war. Only a few calm, informed observers were able apparently to see through it. In the letter to Hugh W. Long and Company, an executive of Roosevelt and Sons of Pine Street, wrote 6 months before we were plunged into the war the following: I cannot refrain from expressing my contempt for those who are politically toying with a fear motive at this time and painting a picture of the United States overrun by Adolf Hitler. There never was a country so strongly situated strategically for defense as this one. And when in addition, that country has more oil than any other country in the world and more practical inventive achievement to its credit, including the original invention of and most of the significant improvements upon the airplane, and has an established and recognized aptitude for mass production, it is clear to me that it has a special genius for mechanized warfare, and that all talk about what Adolf Hitler's armed forces may do to us is just bunk. Just bunk. No, if totalitarianism is coming to the United States, it will come because the American people can be charmed by insincere, superficial, adroit politicians and fail to demand the leadership of men of character, of courage, and honesty. Nobody could have put it more eloquently. Perhaps the most poisonous of all the propaganda themes circulated in this country in full-page newspaper ads and elsewhere was the purported statement of Adolf Hitler that he was going to come over here someday and finish off decadent Yankeedom. The passage was dressed up to look like a direct quotation and was placed over the name of Adolf Hitler. Every effort was made to give the impression that it came from Mein Kampf, whereas it was something Hermann Rauschnig had said, Hitler had said, the unsupported testimony of one man, a refugee, and we should add here, a discredited man by history, Rauschnig. He said that Hitler would come over here and finish off Yankeedom. Hitler never said it. Such a proposition is quite at variance with what Hitler actually wrote in Mein Kampf, where he decries Germany's vulnerability on account of her exposed borders and the small extent of her national territory, and extols the United States on account of its vast space, which is equivalent to the size of a continent, and its incomparable inner strength. The gigantic North American shore, he says, quote, with the enormous resources of its soil, is much more invulnerable than the encircled German Reich. End of quote. And again he says, military decisions are more quickly, more easily, more completely, and more effectively gained against states which have extensive territories. Moreover, the magnitude of a national territory is of itself a certain assurance that an outside power will not hastily risk the adventure of an invasion. For in that case, the struggle for power would have to be long and exhausting before victory would be hoped for. The risk being so great, there would have to be extraordinary reasons for such an aggressive adventure. Hence, it is that the territorial magnitude of a state furnishes a basis whereon national liberty and independence can be maintained with relative ease. Does that sound to you like an Adolf Hitler that was chewing carpets, climbing walls, having girls defecate and urinate in his face to get his jollies? Or does that sound to you like a man of an absolute sound mind who understood America very clearly and obviously in his calculations would not later forget the power of this America? Yet Bullitt knew war had been decided upon 4 months before Adolf Hitler ever gave any orders for anything. Yet how firmly propaganda had fixed the public impression that Mein Kampf offered a program for world conquest is brought out in the following excerpt taken from the transcript of the question period following an address given by Ambassador John Cudahy before the Chicago Council of Foreign Relations a month and a half before Pearl Harbor. Chairman Bentley, I have a question here in writing. How do you reconcile Hitler's announced plan of world conquest with his statements made to you? Mr. Cudahy, I know of no plan of world conquest. Cries of, how about Mein Kampf from the audience? I read Mein Kampf very thoroughly, and I cannot find any plan for world conquest. Cries of, oh, from the audience. It used to put me to sleep, but after I had been in Germany, I read the thing very thoroughly. Hitler has made a number of statements that would indicate that he has dreamt of world empire, but I guess Hitler can be guilty of a bit of campaign oratory. I know that this war was caused by the last war. You see, if every politician in America, England, Canada, and so on was kept to his campaign promises, and if they were as magnified and blown out of proportion of statements Hitler allegedly made, many of those people ought to be dangling from trees. There never was any actual evidence that world conquest was contemplated. General Marshall, Army Chief of Staff, in his biannual report released in October 1945, stated that valuation by the War Department General Staff of interrogations of ranking members of the German High Command had failed to disclose any overall German strategic plan to conquer the world. That's the way it was. The range of German planes hardly reached England. They never reached the production centers in the Ural Mountains. How could anybody in their sane mind believe that Adolf Hitler could invade the United States? Technologically, at that time, in that period, impossible. Now, the conclusion of this book. The Allied program to re-educate the Germans is a case of one deluded group trying to disillusion another. Our conviction that the Germans have been filled with poisonous propaganda is quite correct, and our impulse to extirpate the effects of that propaganda is a good one. However, we cannot accomplish our purpose when so many of our own ideas are false, and especially when the Germans know from direct experience that they are false. To be successful, a teacher must enjoy the respect of those he attempts to teach. He must win that respect through the demonstrated superiority of his knowledge and understanding. Part of what we are trying to teach the Germans is true and could have most salutary effect on the German outlook. If only we could get the Germans to listen with respect and sympathy. But too much of what we try to make them believe, the Germans know to be untrue. And this knowledge on their part causes them to lose their respect for us and to turn a deaf ear to everything we say. Our re-education program should begin at home. If we could only overcome the effects of our own illusions, born of propaganda and ignorance, arising from lack of intimate knowledge of European affairs, if we could only possess ourselves of the facts and then face them courageously. We not only could re-educate the Germans, but could eliminate many erroneous and strategically and tragically dangerous features of our German program. Unless we do revise our own ideas and the program to which those ideas have given birth, we are in danger of losing Germany, Europe, and everything for which we fought this costly war. It is hoped that this book will help point the way to truth and therefore to our future success. Our experience in Europe has already taught us some bitter lessons and has forced us to ameliorate in some degree the harsh and brutal program which we set about to force upon our defeated enemy. But we have much more to learn and must make many more changes in our own policy before we can hope for the success of our German adventure. With these facts in mind, we offer the following suggestions, and we will follow those suggestions in another program. But this is the key operating term on this conclusion to this booklet, is that if we only possess ourselves of the facts and then face them courageously, and if we only overcome the effects of our own illusions born of propaganda and ignorance, arising from lack of intimate knowledge of European affairs, that would be a good beginning. And let me tell you, this is what the problem was. Moralizing instead of morality, and arrogant ignorance, coupled with a total lack of understanding, made America and many of its policymakers the saps, being basically manipulated by people like Stalin and his henchmen, those who were behind him. That's the tragedy of the Second World War. That's the reason why I made this long series of programs.